Welcome back. Have you ever wanted to change the world? It seems most of us have had that desire at one time or another. Well, a little later on in the show, we're going to meet three young people who set out to change the world and may be well on their way to succeeding. Stay tuned for their story, but right now let's join Pat for today's edition of Perspective.
Around the world, there are groups of freedom fighters who are trying to overthrow the communist governments which control their countries. One of them, Nicaragua. Another one, Angola. Another, Afghanistan. They all come to our mind. But one of the least known and most successful of the anti-communist forces in the world is Renamo, the freedom fighters in Mozambique. Scott Hatch traveled to Mozambique and brings us this exclusive 700 Club report.
We're in the war zone here in Mozambique. And in the next few minutes, we're going to show you pictures that you've never seen before, because no television crew has ever been allowed to visit here until now. We're with the anti-communist insurgency organization known as Renamo. And what they've done over the last 9 years, virtually alone, is to liberate the majority of their country from the Marxist regime which rules this nation. Renamo has been at war against the Marxists since 1977, and their apparent success has to be one of the world's best-kept secrets. Starting from a small area with only 600 men 9 years ago, the movement has continually expanded its area of influence. Today, Renamo claims to operate in all 10 regions of the country, a fact the government won't even deny. The capital city of Maputo itself is not exempt from Renamo activity either. Numerous sabotage raids are conducted each month within the capital. Renamo claims to have 20,000 armed troops and another 7,000 already trained but with no weapons to give them. This movement has been successful for several reasons, mainly because they appear to have the sympathy of the Mozambican people, but also because of this man. His name is Afonso Jacama, and he is the leader of Renamo. We talked recently at his headquarters in central Mozambique, and he told me that his reason for fighting the Marxist government was a very simple one.
We know that democracy is the only stable way for all people, not only for the Mozambicans. And that is why we, Renamo, defend democracy. It seems that we have been forgotten in Washington. They don't realize that there is a war going on here against Marxism. Socialism has been tried here for 12 years, and it has failed. This is why we are convinced that a democratic system, principally a multi-party system, will be successful for the people of Mozambique.
A guerrilla war is fought with the mind as much as with bullets. During this exercise, Renamo sets a trap. Their first job is to lay what are called anti-personnel mines in a dirt road. These mines are meant not to kill, only to maim. The victim is not only permanently put out of action, but the opposing army is also forced to feed and care for him. You see, in a guerrilla war, a badly injured enemy is better than a dead one. The explosives are then planted at the base of a large tree. The strategy is to blow the tree in such a way as to have it fall across the road. Later, when the enemy is clearing the road, they will step on the mines. The squad commander checks his handiwork. Satisfied, they disappear. Edward Kane is a leading expert on anti-communist movements and recently contributed to the book Combat on Communist Territory, which details insurgents groups such as Renamo around the world.
Are these people in Renamo bandits, as some have called them?
Bandit is the traditional Marxist word for a counter-revolutionary. The Marxists, wherever there is an insurgency, claim that they are the representatives of the people. They are the organized party, the vanguard party of the people. Anyone who opposes them in their propaganda is disorganized, has no policy, has no program, are merely criminals.
The intriguing question is, where does America stand on this issue? It seems the administration is cozying up to the president of Mozambique, Samora Machel, a man who openly claims to be a Marxist. During a trip to Moscow, he heralded that he fully intended to make Mozambique the first fully Marxist state in Africa. In his book, The Process of Popular Democratic Revolution in Mozambique, he calls America the most cruel and bloodthirsty aggressor of our time. Beyond that, during an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Michel claimed that Marxism-Leninism could not be stopped because science does not stop. It keeps developing, unlike the Bible or the Quran, which can't produce anything new. This makes his trip last September to Washington all the more curious, especially since he was warmly welcomed by President Reagan at the White House. The State Department maintains their hopes are to lure Michel away from Moscow, and their plan does have its supporters in the region. South Africa's Foreign Minister, Pik Botha.
I must honestly say to you, yes, I agree with it. We are a neighbor of this country. We've got to cooperate. I think this country must have learned a lesson. 9 years of Soviet friendship has brought it only misery, starvation, hardship, and the time has come for us, all of us, to assist to create peace there.
There have been accusations from some American lawmakers that much of the estimated $40 million annually in economic aid that the United States sends Mozambique never gets to the people it's intended for. Instead, it's used to bolster the government's armed forces. Renamo claims this is true as well, and made available to us this film, shot by Renamo troops. It shows a massive government warehouse. In it are sacks of grain and food, which were meant for the general public. After its capture recently, Renamo acquired the weaponry there and then distributed the food to the people.
It seems to me that in both Angola and Mozambique, the West has maybe the best opportunity they've had to roll back communism, to see a communist government supported by Moscow overthrown by a popular rebellion within the country, to disprove the Brezhnev doctrine, which says that once a socialist, that is a Marxist government, is imposed on a country, that situation is irreversible.
Porque nós temos acompanhado a imprensa internacional.
We have followed the international press, and even the Reagan administration considers Samora Machel as a great man, without realizing that he has forced a dictatorship on the people without their consultation. The American people have concerned themselves with forces which are fighting for liberty in Angola, Vietnam, Nicaragua, and Laos. I would also hope that they won't forget that in Mozambique there exist democratic forces who are fighting against the Marxist system.
This is Scott Hatch reporting.
Well, Scott Hatch has just returned from Mozambique and with us today. Scott, that was quite an adventure. You were the first American television reporter to go inside with those Renamo rebels.
First television reporter anywhere.
Anywhere to do that?
Yes.
How did it feel? How did you get in there?
Well, I'll be honest. I think I deserve a raise over this trip. I can't really get into exact specifics, but we passed through 3 countries and flew a number of hours at treetop level and below on a twin-engine private aircraft to get in. In fact, it's sometimes just 3 feet above various waterways. In fact, we had to raise the nose of the plane to get over the high grass at the shoreline. That'll give you an idea of how low we were.
One misstep and you would have crashed.
That's right. In fact, a plane that had gone in just before us trying this route, he'd ditched his plane into a tree. So no one was injured, thank goodness. But
well, that is in order to avoid coastal radar?
Radar, right. Yeah. And of course, MiG fighters in Beira and various other places in Mozambique.
Tell me about General, it's Jacama?
Jacama. Yes.
Tell me about General Jacama. Is he for real? Do you feel or not?
Well, of course, it's difficult to really ascertain an individual just spending 2 or 3 or 4 days with them. Mm-hmm. However, I will say this, as far as what we in the West determine as philosophies of democracy and philosophies of freedom, I think he more closely adheres to it than certainly Samora Machel and the Mozambique resistance.
Mao Zedong said the way to win a war, guerrilla war, was to take the countryside and then slowly squeeze the cities. Obviously, the UNITA forces with Savimbi have done just that in Angola, and he trained under the Chinese. What about the Renamo? They seem to, you said 80% 5% of the total country of Mozambique?
Well, the numbers are very difficult. Of course, in any kind of a guerrilla war, many times the resistance occupies a position at night and then retreats in the day. But most everyone tends to feel that they control 70 to 85% of the country out in the rural areas. The provincial capitals, of course, the main cities of Maputo and Beira, are still firmly in Frelimo's control. However, as we did mention, there are numerous sabotage raids from time to time in those cities themselves.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, joining us now in our Washington Bureau is the administration's point man on African policy. He's also the architect of what is called the constructive engagement policy, now in effect in the southern African continent. It's a pleasure to welcome to the 700 Club the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Dr. Chester Crocker. It's a pleasure to have you with us on the 700 Club today.
Pleased to see you again, Pat.
What about the government of Michel? Are they truly forsaking Marxism and moving toward the West, or has there been some engagement that gives you optimistic hope?
Well, Pat, I'd put it this way. We, like everyone else, recognize that the Soviet and Marxist experiment in Mozambique has been a failure. And I think that's increasingly recognized by the Mozambican leadership itself, despite some rhetoric that's tossed around from time to time. It's for that reason that President Michel has been willing to work with South Africa and work with us and other Western countries to look towards an alternative path. That path involves such things as reducing violence across borders, getting rid of the ANC guerrillas that were trying to get into South Africa to blow things up there. President Michel threw 1,000 ANC guerrillas out of his country as part of a deal struck a couple of years ago. It involves also opening up the private sector of Mozambique, which had been totally stultified up to now. We see some results. It's a process. We're not at the goal line yet. But, for example, there is now some food on the shelves in a number of the major towns and urban centers in Mozambique as a result of providing some incentives for the farmers and for the private sector in that country. We share the goal of getting Mozambique pulled away from a pro-Soviet orientation and Mozambique opened up and more democratic and so forth. The issue is how you get there. And to us, aligning ourselves with the kind of organization that has just been discussed on your program is not the way to go.
Well, why is not that? Wouldn't it be better to have an overthrow, or does that? Why would that not be in our best interest?
Any attempt to do it, I think, is more likely to provoke just expanded chaos. There's already lots of chaos, as the show has shown in Mozambique. And even if it were to succeed, which we think is very unlikely, what you would then have is a turning of the tables with a guerrilla rebellion taking place that would be Soviet-backed. The South Africans, who see this thing with a great deal of realism, have looked at that equation and said, let's try and see if we can't get a change of policy and a change of orientation by the government of Michel, who they recognize as a nationalist who has a lot of respect and following inside Mozambique. What Renamo represents historically, Pat, is an offshoot from the Frelimo movement that is now in government, that was backed by Ian Smith's government in Rhodesia back in the late 70s, and then increasingly has been backed by the South African military and by elements in Portugal and Brazil who have financial interests at stake. To equate it with UNITA, in our view, is to distort the picture in a very fundamental way.
Scott, do you have something?
Secretary Crocker, this is Scott Hatch. Have you ever met with General Jacama?
I have not, no.
Why is that?
Well, he is in the bush. He is, or else he's with his foreign supporters in other capitals. We have a relationship with the government which we recognize, and we travel inside the country in terms of trying to get a look-see to see what happens. But we have not had the occasion to go into rebel-held areas and seek to find out what is their doctrines. We hear about their doctrines, of course, because they give press conferences in Lisbon and elsewhere.
So it's because they're not the recognized legitimate government?
Yeah, that is correct, and I think it's been very clear since Michel's visit here last fall that it is our policy to work with the government to try and move it, to encourage it to go in the directions that we want to see, and we don't think that Renamo represents an instrument that will help get us there.
But yet you have met with the head of the ANC, the African National Congress, Oliver Tambo. They are not the recognized legitimate government of South Africa. What's the difference?
No, I think that's inaccurate. I have not met with Mr.
Well, your
Tambo.
deputies have. or at least representatives of the State Department have?
I think there's a great deal of difference in these different situations, and we can't just look at sort of applying blanket doctrines. Take, for example, the issue of Angola. We feel very strongly that UNITA represents a legitimate nationalist movement in the Angolan context, and we have been meeting and talking and consulting together with the people in UNITA for the last 5 years consistently, as well as the government of Angola in Luanda. An interesting comment that I would throw in here is that Jonas Savimbi himself, the UNITA leader, has said, for heaven's sakes, please don't equate us in UNITA with Renamo. Renamo is essentially a creation of Ian Smith and the South Africans.
One last question. We understand that there's some people in Congress that are now objecting to the aid we're giving to Mozambique. Is there any serious move in Congress to cut that off or not?
Well, Pat, there have been some expressions of concern from people in Congress about making sure that we use our economic assistance, A, to get to the people themselves, and we think we do. We think we have a very good track record on that. And then secondly, to make sure that our assistance bolsters what is left and what could be built of the private sector. And we fully share that desire to try and strengthen the private sector in Mozambique. The government up to now, up until recently, had been stultifying the private sector, and that's a formula for chaos. You and I have seen Africa. We know what happens when the government sits on the backs of farmers and producers, and we've got to see movement in that direction. So if Congress urges us to do that, they're really encouraging us to do what we want to do.
Africa in general, I think we should cover that. We were together in the Sudan, and we've seen that awful drought and famine that is sweeping over that. Is there any encouragement at all in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in the other part of that Sahel region?
Well, I can't be too encouraged about Ethiopia. I think we in this country have done the right thing by saving millions of lives, but I don't see much sign of encouragement in terms of government policy there, Pat. And in Sudan, we just had a new election. We have a new government just trying to organize itself. We hope that they will be more coherent in organizing their economy. They have a humane tradition of receiving refugees and trying to feed people, but there's just been a lot of inefficiency and again, too much government involvement in the economy, with the result that there aren't enough incentives for people to produce and distribute, in effect, the way we do it here, according to market forces.
Well, thank you very much for being with us on the 700 Club.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Dr. Chester Crocker. And, Scott, when's your next trip going to be?
Well, I don't know. I think I've got to get caught up on this. But we're looking, of course, a lot of things going on in Pakistan and India and various places. You
have been with UNITA before we close. You were in Angola with Jonas Savimbi. You've been with Renamo. And do you share Secretary Crocker's opinion that indeed they are vastly different, or do they seem to you to be the same type of thing?
Well, in a lot of philosophies, they're pretty much the same. But the Secretary was correct in the fact that there is not a great deal of communication that goes on between the two. However, that is something that General Jacama said that he hoped to alleviate here in the very near future. We're going to go in again, and I think we're going to go out in the countryside, look at the situation more closely, spend more time, and come back with another report.
We appreciate this first-hand report, ladies and gentlemen, and as far as I know, these are the first pictures you will have seen anywhere of that particular part of the country. We'll be back with more right after this. Stay tuned.
Coming up, how a miracle of the heart keeps an 87-year-old general